You have arrived at the right place because soon you will gain a deeper understanding and practical insights into how your environment, thoughts, stress, and behaviors affect your biological age and subsequently your mental performance. In this episode, we will discuss something that isn't really present in the longevity and performance fields: how our epigenetic profile impacts our cognitive capacities and how we can improve it to enhance our mental performance. I'm excited to introduce Hannah Wendt, co-founder and director of operations at TruDiagnostics, who will share her expert knowledge and insights on this topic with us. Welcome, Hannah. It's a super pleasure to have you here with me talking about today's interesting topic combination, which is epigenetics and mental performance. So before we jump into this intriguing topic, I would really love to hear just a little bit more about you. And I'm also sure that our listeners would love that as well. So could you just give a short brief introduction of yourself, like what you do and why you decided to work with epigenetics?
Sure. Thanks, Linda. I'm super excited to be here and have a deep conversation about epigenetics and that mental performance, as you mentioned. So my name's Hannah Wendt. I'm the director of operations and one of the co-founders at TruDiagnostic. And ever since I was a young little girl, I have always been interested in science and the way, biology, essentially, the way the world works and the environment that we surround ourselves in. So I am originally from north of Dayton, Ohio, a small little town, and then went to University of Kentucky for college and my undergrad, and really took a position that was a little unusual right outside of college, which was working at a pharmacy that specialized in unique peptide products and formulations. And that really opened my eyes to this entire cash pay healthcare provider space, almost this healthy type of medicine or model instead of that sick care model. So when I was really exposed to that, it opened all these other doors. And after we sold that pharmacy back in 2019, we created TruDiagnostic, which is an epigenetic DNA methylation testing company. And I'm sure we'll get into what that means here in a little bit. But we specialize in unique algorithms and outcomes. Most people usually are familiar with us through our biological age-based testing. So we're really, really good at quantifying the number one risk factor for almost every single chronic disease and death, which is actually aging itself.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing the background. And yeah, I'm really so excited to hear everything that we will be able to learn through this conversation. So maybe we can just actually jump right into it and I will let you speak more about it. And I think like many of our listeners may have heard that epigenetics studies like how external and internal factors such as our behavior environment can turn on and off our certain genes. So could you just open up this topic from here and then explain the concept of epigenetics, like what that is all about, in a way that then can make sense for anyone who is new for this topic as well?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start off by a simple definition of epigenetics and maybe compare it to something that is known, which is, our genetics. So epi is a Greek prefix, the EPI, it just means above. So we're actually looking on top of the genome. And if you remember way back to again, taking biology maybe in sixth or seventh grade, when we define genetics, that's going to be our nucleotides, our makeup, our A's, T's, and C's and G's, where you get 50% from mom and 50% from dad. And those are never going to change unless you're doing some crazy gene editing. But the epigenetics, what's on top of that baseline genetic sequence can be modified. So we can turn genes on and off. We can change certain things, which will then have downstream effects on maybe, again, performance, behavior, other additional outcomes, phenotypes, right? The color of our hair, the color of our eyes, the way we behave in certain environments. So we really like to refer as epigenetics being almost the software, right? It's kind of controlling the genetics, which is the hardware. So to maybe echo what you were saying, Linda, it's really about being in control, right? Food is medicine. You are what you eat. You're not your DNA. Kind of all those cliche sayings that we see on social media or online. Those are actually almost describing the definition of epigenetics, where we're no longer in the passenger seat, right? It isn't, we're not going through disease just because of our genetics or our family history anymore. With the power of our epigenetics and being able to kind of control those expression levels of the genes, we're able to actually reduce our risk for different diseases. And maybe that's through lifestyle changes, supplements, medications. Maybe it's through procedural-based, interventional treatment planning as well.
I really love that. And I think, like, as you said, like being actually in control of that, I think that's really well said. So maybe if we kind of like turn this towards the mental performance, which is the second point of today's topic, and I think also many of our viewers are really looking to enhance their mental performance or performance in general. So of course, when I talk about mental performance, that includes like a lot of different things, but I think like cognitive functions and like our ability to determine how effectively and efficiently we can actually process different sort of information, how we make decisions, solve problems, and just adapt to our environment, etc. So if we start with a very open question, and I know this is like a massively broad topic, but how would you describe the connection of epigenetics and mental performance?
We definitively see a very strong correlation with biological aging and mental performance, or cognitive abilities, right? Where as your biological age increases, your cognitive abilities start to decline. So they would be, I would say they would be positively associated if you define them this way, meaning as your biological age goes up, your mental performance goes down. So inversely proportional. It depends on how you define those. So make sure we get those correct. But essentially that's across all algorithms. So we have the overarching kind of biological ages. Those are the numbers that you can just compare to your chronological age. I think interestingly enough, even this Dunedin pace, what we call this third generation clock, that more of this pace of aging, it's like a 3 to 6 month running average of how quickly you've been aging. So it comes out as more of it's like a speedometer, more of a ratio or a fraction. It tells you how quickly you're aging biologically for every one chronological year. And this one is very, very tied to quality of life metrics. Things like cognitive decline, the ability to think clearly or properly, right? I'm sure people listening sometimes walk into a room and say, what did I even walk in here for? Or, you're scrolling on your phone or you're Googling something and you're like, wait a second, what was that, right? Those are actually docks in our cognitive performance or our mental performance. So, making sure you're keeping track of that. And of course, we have even some other outcomes that are tightly related to brain function. So this is where I may go off on a tangent and you may have to bring me back in, Linda, but we have what we call these EBPs, or these epigenetic biomarker proxies. So if there's anything you take away from this conversation, this is a really, really key component in where epigenetics is going in the future, where we just use epigenetics to inform us about other outcomes. So, you have your traditional, as an example of this, I want to compare it to CRP. So you have your traditional serum CRP that is very, a non-specific inflammatory marker, right? That can really move based on caffeine you've had that morning before you get tested, exercise, stress levels. But if we actually look at the DNA methylation CRP, we see that the DNA methylation CRP is going to be much more related to widespread brain health outcomes and cognitive functions. So this was a huge discovery, and again, one that's been heavily validated in the literature. For example, the DNA methylation CRP, we're able to pick up things like white matter hyperintensity, total brain volume, and other cognitive function abilities as well. And then we can look at the specific genes that are associated with that. And that one in particular is the SOCS3 gene, the suppressor of cytokine signaling 3. That is heavily involved with things like information processing, speed of vocabulary, test on certain subjects and different grades that you receive. So by looking at the DNA methylation and the epigenetics, we're actually able to find more about the underlying processes. And in that case, I think CRP is a really good example, just because you're asking about the mental performance.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is totally on topic, so you did not go off boards. And I think there's something I want to ask here, because I think it's interesting what you said, like, of course, regarding the aging, but then also the brain health aspect. And I'm thinking just like about the fact of turning genes on or off, or like how our environment actually exposes us to kind of like turn certain genes on. So let's think about the cognitive performance perspective, like let's say skill development or exploring your own talents. Do you see like here any practical correlations that someone can actually start using to actually explore more about them or from their mental performance?
Yeah, I think all of those. I don't know that all of those have been definitively cited in the literature, verbatim, but I definitely know that, finding one's purpose, right? Finding that purpose of yours just in life can lead to, better quality of life, which in turn is related to better overall epigenetic aging as well, right? So it's almost like a domino effect, right? You feel more confident, you feel maybe more happy, and in turn, you're going to have better biological aging. So absolutely, all of those are related. I think furthermore, Linda, to maybe expand on that topic too, even the way we talk to ourselves, even this feedback loop that we feed ourselves is going to have an effect on our epigenetics. So if we are a person, and we can all get, stuck in a rut sometimes, who makes a mistake and is just thinking, oh, why did I do that? Or, you're kind of, not being too kind to yourself, right? And you're stuck on that one mistake that you made. That's going to probably change some things on an epigenetic level that we don't want to be changed for the worse. Whereas if you're someone who is more positive and you have that better outlook on life, where you think to yourself, oh, I made a mistake, it's okay, right? I'll do better next time. I'll prepare better. I'll put more effort into that. And you focus more on, the quote unquote good side of things, for lack of a better word, then you're going to have more of a positive reinforcement, or a better feedback loop, compared to the negative way of thinking. So we actually do see changes in that on the cellular and the molecular level.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up, because I think this is something I'm super passionate about, like how actually the internal like monologue that we're having with yourself, how that actually not only affects like on an attitude level, but as you say, on a like biological molecular level. And I think that's really interesting. And maybe I could ask a follow-up question there, like for our listeners as well, to like not think that once you feel a little bit negative, that's going to change your whole cellular being. But like, how would you say, like, what is the process of this internal thought process actually start changing something on a cellular level, and how to kind of like reverse that if you have gone down the more negative path?
Yeah, I think it goes back to maybe stress. So let's connect it back to stress in a way, right? If you are, if you do have that internal monologue, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you for mentioning that. And that is more negative. You probably have a stressor going on, right? Something's not sitting well with you. And it may not be from that exact event, but maybe something external, maybe something internal has affected you for that day. And you're, maybe just in a bad mood and having a negative outlook on life, right? So maybe looking back, whether it's, again, from the outside or inside, and identifying that stressor, and then taking appropriate, direction in order to reduce that stress. So sure, maybe some acute stress is okay, right? I think we need to have a little bit of stress in our life, because that means we care. That means we have a sense of urgency. That means, again, we go back to that purpose. We have a definitive goal. We're driven, we're ambitious. But too much stress, I think, can really tip the seesaw or teeter-totter in the wrong way, where it's just a burden and an overload, where it could lead to, further oxidative stress in the body, further inflammation, increasing things like CRP and IL-6. It could, lead to kind of this negative downstream effect. So what we've seen when we relate it back to the biological aging and some of the studies that have been published out there is stress reduction absolutely has a positive effect on biological aging. And I think this is also where it gets very, very personal, because maybe the tips and tricks that work for me don't work for you, Linda, and anyone else listening. So, for me personally, I have been trying to incorporate, and I know we've talked about this beforehand offline, breathing exercises, right? When we first chatted. So, kind of mixing that up, anaerobic, aerobic, just exercise in general. I need to get movement. Usually before I start my day, it clears my mind. I've been doing the, how do you pronounce it? Is it transcendent meditation? Is that correct?
That could be. I would say that My
It's a
pronunciation.
specific type of
Yeah.
meditation. Yeah, where essentially you just sit with
Yes.
yourself. No music, no sound, no anything. And you kind of go back to that mantra, that one kind of word or phrase that you create for yourself. And that's really hard for me because usually my mind's racing. So I've been doing that the past 2 mornings, waking up just 20 minutes earlier and sitting with myself. And I've actually found a lot of peacefulness within that. So again, starting off my day with meditation, going to the gym, refueling my body with a high protein breakfast. But again, everyone's going to be a little bit different there. Maybe you like to read, maybe you like to write or draw or just go on a walk, something to reduce those overall stress levels.
Yeah, and like thanks for bringing all of this in because I think it's and what we also believe in is the holistic approach. Like everything is so connected, and like as you say, it's super personal. So you need to know what works for you. But you gave some great examples that I think can work for many. And we will go to stress because there will be like some questions about that. But before we go there, I would want to have one more follow up on this topic because I think it's super interesting to hear your perspective and the knowledge. So when we talk about like all of this, like understanding your skills or like the mental performance part. So how do you see like the personal development aspect in terms of like personal development and like how you can kind of like true personal development, whether that's searching for the purpose as you already mentioned or something similar. So
Gotcha.
how that has an effect on the epigenetic factors.
Yeah, I think a huge effect, right? I think as we become older chronologically, right? We're maybe a little bit more sure of ourselves as a person, right? Where we fit into the world, what we want to pursue in terms of a job or occupation or career, right? So I think there's some wisdom in getting older, right? Some people don't like to define biological aging as a disease because disease has a negative connotation, and people believe aging is this beautiful thing. So, I do think the personal development part is rather important. I don't think there are any direct clinical trials or anything that's actually published looking at personal development, and that'd be very interesting to create one. But I do truly believe, as we get older chronologically, it's almost a trade-off because yes, we don't also want to get older biologically, but maybe as we do learn a little bit more about ourselves, it can make us more sure of ourselves in the world and where we fit and what's our role, thus reducing overall biological age.
If you want a personalized understanding of your epigenetic profile, click the link here or check the link in the description to find TruDiagnostics tests, the most advanced epigenetic analysis on the market. With their tests, you will get a comprehensive overview of your current state, including various biomarkers and your biological age. So maybe just like one more kind of like a wrap up, so summary before we move to stress, which you already touch upon. So as a summary, how do you think kind of like the ability for me to understand about epigenetics, how can that kind of like be applied to enhance mental performance in your everyday life if you would have to say like, let's say a couple of simple things on a more practical level?
Yeah, I think definitively, if you look at any of the data, you will see that mental performance is going to decrease with increased biological aging. So I will say, they're inversely proportional if you look at them that way. So we want to do whatever we can to really prioritize mental performance or cognitive function. In order to do that, you may be able to implement some of the skills that we talked about, such as finding a purpose, right? Personal development, understanding your role in the world, connecting with great friends, quality of relationships, overall happiness, and more of that, again, positive internal monologue, or even dialogue with others, to really optimize the overall biological age. I truly believe those go hand in hand, and you need one to optimize the other.
100%. Thanks, Hannah. That was great. So then towards the stress, which you already touched upon, and I think like first I would maybe like to also discuss like hormetic stress, which is more about how mild stress or like small challenge can actually have a positive effect on your cellular being or on a cellular level. So how would you say that what is the influence of hormetic stress on an epigenetic or from an epigenetic perspective? before we move to the negative stress?
Yeah. So in terms of the positive stress, there hasn't been many, I would say, direct studies looking at that. Right. I think we can definitely, though, at least entertain the idea or hypothesize that a little bit of stress is okay, by what I mentioned earlier, which again is more of about finding your position in life, right? And understanding that you have something to wake up every day for and look forward to, right? More of that purpose. What I will talk about, though, this may lead a little bit too much into the negative stress, Linda, but with the original Dr. Steve Horvath clock, there were 353 methylation sites or epigenetic positions that they looked at, and about a third of those were connected to the glucocorticoid receptor elements and system. So we definitively know that probably cortisol levels are positively associated or directly correlated with biological age, meaning that if your cortisol levels increase, that stress hormone, then your biological age is probably going to increase as well, right? So there's probably a sweet spot where, if those cortisol levels just increase a teeny bit or, somewhere in the middle, then maybe your biological age can decrease. Maybe they can become inversely proportional and kind of, switch from that direct relationship. So there probably is a little bit of a sweet spot there.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think that's also the challenge in general, like to measure like what is too much and what is like the optimal level of stress. And that's of course individual as well. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a tricky one. So if we move on to the more negative stress and like really like this high pressure environment and how that affects you. So would you like to kind of like describe more about the science behind like what happens on a biological level in your body because of this negative stress?
Yeah, and I think it goes, to the same thing we were just talking about, is way too much cortisol, right? Thus really hiking up those stress levels internally in the body. So again, that stress hormone. We do have one paper I want to reference, which is by Dr. Jesse Poganik out of Dr. Vadim Gladishev's lab at Harvard, and it's called Biological Stress. I think this is what it's called word for word. I think it's biological stress is increased and then restored upon recovery. And what they look at is three, I would say, rather almost more extreme stressors. So they look at pregnancy, they look at severe COVID-19 cases, and then they look at elected and unelected surgeries. So, depending on how you rank those or scale those, one can be more severe than the other. What they saw is transient increases with stress during each of those events. However, and it depends on the outcome regarding the timeline at which they measured afterwards. Afterwards, though, there was a certain threshold at which that stress was, or which that biological age was restored after the stressor. So the biological age could either be restored to baseline or even better than baseline as well. So again, maybe this goes with part of your first question too, is, maybe some of those stressors are good, but we do see that reversal actually come back in the long run after that event has taken place. So we see, the biological age increase and then go back down. Of course, we don't want to see any of those increases in the first place, but it's positive that, we see those biological age decreases after the event.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like another concept of this is of course also burnout. Like many of our listeners are like high performers or entrepreneurs, and I think burnout in the business world is becoming even more and more common. Of course, we also have more awareness, which is great, but do you see that burnout, or based on your knowledge, is burnout also in the same line with like severe stress or like this negative stress, or is that kind of like a next step of even more damaging factor on a cellular level?
I think it's definitely damaging. I know, and it's probably the same for you, Linda. I know how hard you work, but especially in the US, right? It's wake up at 6 a.m. Don't go to bed, or don't stop working until 9 p.m., right? And then your mind doesn't even have enough time to kind of shut off, and then you can't go to sleep, and you wake up and you do it all over again, maybe 5 days a week, 6 days a week, maybe you do that every single day of the week, especially more in the entrepreneur kind of startup environment. So it definitely can be damaging to your overall health. It can, really throw your circadian rhythm out of whack, which again can have negative effects on the biological aging process. So that's definitely something to be concerned about. However, I do think we could actually see that reversal if you step away, or if you're able to maybe delegate some of those responsibilities, or manage projects to an extent, or maybe hire more people to fill in those roles. So I definitely think we would see the reversal. Subjectively, I've seen, several people now who have taken our test, and I'll never forget this one case study. Even this person who he was married to one of the NPs that we work really closely with. And basically his baseline was awful, biological aging extremely accelerated. Come to find out, he was an owner of a couple businesses, still heavily involved in, day-to-day kind of managing everyone. And then he retested, I think it was 2 years later. And within those 2 years, he actually, he didn't quit. He just, stepped back and took a board position. Also changed his diet completely, did more leisure activities. In particular, he really liked golfing. So, he spent a couple days a week golfing, again, surrounding himself with quality relationships, friends, and really made such a drastic change to his life. His biological aging afterwards decreased significantly.
Oh, wow.
From all aspects of the algorithms that we are looking at. So I've seen it firsthand. I don't think there's any actual clinical trials regarding the burnout, but a lot of people who take our testing are executives, are people who work very hard, who would consider themselves healthy to an extent, but kind of just maybe wanting to correct for all of those late nights, or building the business years ago, trying to correct for that and now optimize.
Yeah, that's really so amazing. And I think it's so wonderful how adaptable our bodies really are, both in good, but then also in bad, unfortunately. But I think I would like to hear from this a little bit more. So as you said already, like the stress management, and really like then doing these drastic changes to actually improve your situation, that's possible. But let's think about like stress recovery and the reversal of potential like negative epigenetic changes that might have already happened. So how quickly about their testing that have been done? So maybe you can give some guidelines of like what is the timeline of kind of like reversing some potential negative effects that have already happened.
I think with some of those overarching biological age clocks, you can see reversals in as quick as 3 to 6 months. So it's definitely doable. You just have to be willing to make the change, and then make it more of a lifestyle, or part of your routine, more of that habitual routine. Whereas with that pace of aging metric that I mentioned, more of the speedometer, how quickly you're aging biologically for every one chronological year, you can actually see reductions even as soon as 2 months. So that clock is really great. The epigenetic age clock is really great for N-of-1 precision-based medicine, where you could start to just take that test every 2 months and implement different stress reduction therapies to maybe see which one works best for you. But of course, even controlling those internal factors, regulating emotions to an extent, right? Being able to have that better internal, I think, monologue are just quick, easy steps that we can work on a daily basis that don't cost anything, and don't take really any time either.
And now I think most of our listeners most likely are super interested about the testing aspect, or like how to test and what to test. So as you work for TruDiagnostics, and we are happy to be your partners as well, I think now could be a perfect moment to briefly discuss the testing. So maybe with the mental performance specifically in mind, what would you say are the main benefits of actually testing your like biological age, and then also like what should one test, like which test to pick, and so on. So I will give you the word.
Yeah, definitely. So we do have two products, like Linda mentioned. So we have the complete kit, and then we have this TruAge Pace kit. So I highly recommend, if you're listening and you're interested, Just do it. Just get started. We can't manage what we don't measure. That's a famous quote by Peter Drucker that I'm sure a lot of you've already heard. So we really just need to get started. So most people are going to test that complete kit at first. That includes everything. It's going to include, I think, about 15 different reports, hundreds of different insights as it relates to your epigenetic aging. And the reason that you should test, the reason that we should care about this in the first place is because it all goes back to being predictive of outcomes. So aging is the number one risk factor for every single chronic disease. If you have a biological aging that is older than your chronological age, or one of your markers is accelerated, you are at increased relative risk for, again, almost every single chronic disease and death. So we're able to really measure that and mitigate it and start to work on reversing those clocks. And once you reverse or you reduce that biological aging, you actually decrease your risk as well. So they go hand in hand together. So most people are going to opt in for that complete kit that includes everything to start. Depending on the results, they're going to want to make different changes. And again, maybe that goes into, lifestyle, supplement, medication, procedural-based therapies. Under lifestyle, there are a lot of intuitive categories, but just to name a couple, things like reducing alcohol consumption, not smoking, optimizing nutrition, sleep, stress, exercise, looking at insulin sensitivity, reducing, toxic load and pollution and other exposures, things like, even keeping a healthy weight. I know BMI is not a great measurement now, but that's been also highly correlated to biological aging. So we want to make sure that we're able to manage that appropriately. After you figure out which interventional treatment plan is right for you, you would want to retest. Could retest as soon as 2 to 3 months if you wanted to with that true age pace, but probably around the 6-month mark, you can retest that Dunedin pace, that true age pace after you've made some of those changes. I do recommend then the larger kit once a year, once every 2 years or so, and then testing with the true age pace for management in between. But, I also recommend making sure you're going to a healthcare provider of some sort for this testing. So if you can get someone like Linda to do the interpretation, you'll be in very, very great hands and understand the reports more to an extent.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Hannah. That was great. And maybe one question also about the ethics, because I think that might be something that people might be considering. So, do you think or see any kind of limitations or considerations one should be mindful when actually using or taking these epigenetic data into account and reading that?
Yeah, so this is a very popular question we get here at TruDiagnostic, as I'm sure you can imagine. Sure. So first and foremost, we own our own laboratory. We're located in Lexington, Kentucky. So that's very important because we don't outsource to any other third parties. Everything's handled in-house. So that is almost a safety net in and of itself. We're CLIA, CLEP, and CAP certified, meaning we basically check all the boxes in terms of rules and regulations, a fancy way of saying that. It is a de-identified sample. So, you have a barcode assigned to you, you register your kit online, and all you're sending us is that sample with the barcoded information. So we're HIPAA compliant. We have a laboratory information management system. It's, a LIMS system. So it's a proprietary in-house made system where we track those samples throughout the entire process. Remember, this is completely different than genetic testing. So the file that we end up with at the end is just looking at a percentage of 1.2 million DNA methylation or epigenetic markers in the body. So we're not testing any genetic material. If you've tested your genetics and someone has a raw data file, they can actually track it back to you, right? Your genetics are very specific to you. Whereas epigenetics, since these markers can change, we actually can never track a file back to one individual person. So that's another kind of safety net that we happen to I would say luck upon in terms of just the epigenetic DNA methylation process.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks. And I can 100% recommend what you do, and we will also put all the links in the description so that people can find your tests easily. So maybe lastly, before we wrap this up, I would be curious to hear, you already mentioned some of the upcoming advancements in the field, but I would like to hear your thoughts on some recent or upcoming studies or advancements in the epigenetics field and how that will be impacting us now and in the future.
Yeah, I think we are super excited about a new report that's going to come out early next year called the Systems Aging Clock. So this is by Raghav Sehgal out of Yale. And TruDiagnostic has exclusively licensed that algorithm where we can tell you the aging of 11 different organ systems. So we know, aging is heterogeneous, meaning we don't all develop liver disease right at the same chronological age or heart disease. So these organs in our body do have a different aging clock or a different aging pattern, what we call almost these agiotypes. So that'll be released sometime, hopefully, in Q1 or Q2 of next year. Some of the organ systems that it covers include liver, brain, heart, hormone, blood. I don't think I said brain yet, but there's 11 different total. So it's going to be able to be more specific for that particular body part or that organ system. Thus, you're going to be able to get a little bit more specific with your targeted treatment framework and therapies.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we're super much looking forward to that. So yeah, thanks. I think the last question I have for you would be just like to wrap everything together. So based on what we have discussed, what would you say are the 3 key takeaways for our listeners to kind of take with them to build better mental performance with epigenetics in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, if you're curious about epigenetics, that first part would be just test, and not test once, but test longitudinally. The reason being is because of what we talked about in the first parts of this podcast, this episode at the beginning, which is mental performance is highly inversely related to biological aging, meaning as your biological age goes up, your mental performance goes down. So in order to make sure we are at our peak performance, we want to optimize biological aging. So that would be, I would say, takeaway number 1. Takeaway number 2 would be about biological aging and stress. So being able to manage stress appropriately in order to increase mental performance, thus decreasing biological age. So that was kind of the second section we talked about regarding just optimizing stress levels, where maybe a little bit of stress is okay, but we don't want too much. And we had seen it go back to baseline when we do have those external stressors as well. So I think being able to manage stress appropriately is huge. And then I think third, just regarding the testing, again, we want to see longitudinal tests being made and then going through a healthcare provider to get that interpretation as well, so you can make the most out of your results.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah, for your time and also for your expertise. I really appreciate you taking the time. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Linda.
I hope you found the world of epigenetics exciting and gained a deeper understanding of it. As you now know, it's essential to know your epigenetic profile and keep working towards improving it consciously, whether it comes to aging, mental performance, or overall health. If you want to test your epigenetic profile, we can highly recommend TruDiagnostic, our trusted partner. We also use TruDiagnostic analyses for our clients who go through the Beyond Sapiens Accelerator, where we transform your individual success by optimizing you like an elite athlete, bridging the gap between human and business performance so you can unleash peak potential, eradicate stress, and thrive in the day-to-day. If you want to learn more about this, I invite you to visit our website up here, where we offer you a free exploration call if you are motivated enough. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope to see you in the next video, so make sure to subscribe to our channel.